Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Fascination, which is episode 10 of season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the third season episode, Fascination. So Fascination is the episode in which Lwaxana Troi comes on board the station for the Gratitude Festival, where everyone's getting ready to celebrate. However, she starts having headaches because she has Xanthi fever, and it's causing everyone around her to start expressing their latent feelings of love and passion towards one another. We see Fennec Baral starts chasing after Dax, Jake starts chasing after Kira. What else is there? Dax starts chasing after Benjamin Sisko, and then Kira and Bashir start making out with each other, and then Quark starts crushing on Keiko, and that's crazy. In the meantime, Keiko's come back to visit the station from her expedition on Bajor. Her and Miles get in a fight because Miles gets a little jealous when she admits that she might have to stay on Bajor longer than she thought, and O'Brien's very upset, but eventually they do make up, and they find out that neither one of them was affected by the Xanthi fever, or whatever it's called. And so Lwaxana says goodbye to Odo and tells him that she won't tell anyone that she realizes that Odo is in love with Kira, and says that she knows what it's like to be in love with someone who doesn't return their affections, and says if Odo ever gets tired on waiting for her, that he should go look her up. So, it's interesting reading the behind the scenes on the people who were involved in making this episode and who liked it and who didn't like it. So let's start with who didn't like it. Armin Shimmerman hated this episode. There was quotes of him on Memory Alpha Online of him saying, I believe him saying it was the worst episode he felt like he was ever involved with. And I also listened to the Delta Flyers podcast, which he was on, and he was constantly reiterating the same thing, that this is a terrible episode, and he was being highly critical of it and saying that it just didn't work at all. Alexander Siddig also didn't care much for this episode, called it a bit of a failure. Our Stephen Barrett took more of a sort of split perspective. He was saying that there were some aspects of it that worked, some that were fun or funny, but other parts that just, is what he said, meaning sucks. So that's who didn't like the episode. So who did like this episode? Well, there were several people who worked on this episode that loved it. First off was the cinematographer, Jonathan West. As I said, he was the cinematographer for TNG. He was brought on board in season 6 of TNG and did season 6 and 7, and then took over for season 3 of Deep Space Nine, and he will be the cinematographer for the rest of Deep Space Nine. He particularly loved this episode because he said that, and Avery Brooks, who directed it, gave him a lot of freedom to do a lot of weird shots. You see a lot of oneers or big, following shots, like long takes. You see like takes that go over that and go from the second floor down, and like weird takes. So he thought he had a ton of fun doing those different takes. Another person who loved this episode was the costume designer, because they said he got to do a lot of interesting weird costumes, a lot of people in leisurely costumes and people on their day off, and having people dress differently and for a celebration, like a formal but casual at the same time costumes, and all the different performers and people having fun throughout the promenade. So the costume designer enjoyed it, and another person who really loved this episode was the composer, Dennis McCarthy, my old friend. Not my friend, I'm a fan of his. He loved this because he thought it allowed him the freedom, because usually he's really constrained, as I talked about before. He's actually a great composer, but usually the studio constrains him, but they let him free and let him do whatever he wanted, because this is more of a lighthearted comedy episode. So it's very interesting to do music for a comedy episode for once, and not music for serious or intense sci-fi. So what have we noticed? Can you tell me, class, what you noticed, and what seems to be the difference between the people who liked the episode and the people who didn't like the episode? Difference is, the people who liked the episode were all doing aesthetics, costume, music, atmosphere, cinematography. We're doing the look, the feel, the style, and those who didn't like it were the actors and the writer, people involved in the creative side of telling a story. So in other words, story sucks, but it looks and sounds good. I will admit, this is a nice looking episode. It's pretty to look at. There all the different colors and the costumes and how they dressed. The set designer had a great job too, and the set design and the cinematography is really good. I did notice those really cool shots and those interesting shots, and the music is good. I'd always loved Dennis McCarthy's music. But so the thing is, though, and this is what I've talked about before on my channel, you can have the prettiest, most awesome looking, well acted, amazing cinematography, great sound design, awesome music, awesome cinematography, great lighting, set design, everything perfect. None of that matters if the story sucks. This is what I talked about in Game of Thrones Season 8, because all these people were like, oh, but the acting's good and oh, the cinematography is amazing. I'm like, you're right. But none of that matters if the story sucks. And unfortunately, the story sucks. Now, to be a bit more clear on that, they have a B plot in this episode with the O'Briens fighting. I actually like the B plot. I think it is definitely the highlight of the episode. It's got, I think, Kalmini and Rosalind Chow both do an amazing job. I think this is one of the best episodes as far as the Keiko and Miles relationship goes. And I'll get more into it, but listening to all the commentary and the reviews on this episode, everyone who has been married was saying, oh my God, this is exactly what it's like to be married. And as for myself, I used to be married as well, and I agree. This is such an accurate representation, not overly romanticized or overly critical. It's so accurate of what it's like to be married. But then you have the A plot, which they were trying to do Midsummer Night's Dream. And kind of, sort of. I mean, just in a sense that everyone's falling in love with them. So here's something. I'll start with something positive. I'll say about the A plot. I will say something positive about the A plot is I love the sense of community. And I think this is something I've been noticed as I've been going through Season 3 overall, is that Season 3 is much better of having a sense of family with the main crew. This is something I think that later seasons will lose. As much as I do like later seasons, but I think Season 3, this part of why I really like Season 3, and might even go as far as to say it's the best season of the show, is because you have this sense of family here. Even in terrible episodes like this, or even especially, the sense of family, the camaraderie between the crew, that really comes off. Another positive thing I'll say about the A plot is I like the Gratitude Festival. I think it's a great idea. It's a great it's an interesting tidbit to explore Bajoran culture, and that's a good excuse to have show the crew on their day off, their leisure time, and then mucking about. I think it's a great idea. I think it's very interesting. And funnily enough, and I noticed this just recently as I've been going through DS9, is that the Gratitude Festival was actually mentioned all the way back in season 1. I think it was the episode The Negus, where Benjamin was saying that he wants to take Jake to Bajor to celebrate the Gratitude Festival, but Jake is like, I want to stay on board and watch ships arrive. That's inconsistent with this episode, though, because this episode is implying that they celebrated the Gratitude Festival on Deep Space Nine every year. It's like, it's a yearly tradition. That means they've done it for more than 1 year so far, and they've only been there 2 years prior to this, so that means it would have done it both years. And then this year, Benjamin's saying, let's go to Bajor to celebrate the Gratitude Festival, and there's no sign of a Gratitude Festival happening on Deep Space Nine. When Jake said, I want to stay here, he would be like, good, well, we can celebrate it here. He didn't say that. He was like, why not? So, but that's a very minor nitpick. Not a big deal. I just thought that was interesting. I didn't realize that until just now, or just this past run through the show when I got to the Negus. I think I mentioned it in my video for that episode. But anyway, so that's what I like about the A-plot. What do I dislike about the A-plot? Everything else. Literally everything else. First of all, let's get into the Lwaxana of it all. As I mentioned before, all of her appearances on Deep Space Nine are terrible. She has one terrible appearance on TNG, 2 mediocre ones, 2 good ones, and 1 great one. Or is it 1 good one and 1 great one? Let me see. So it's 2 good ones, Haven and Dark Page, and 1 great one is Half Alive. And the 2 mediocre ones is Lwaxana Troi and Cost of Living, and 1 terrible one, which is Manhunt. And DS9, she has 3 terrible performances. That's it. They're all terrible. They all suck. I'm sorry, everyone who watches my channel, every time I get to a Lwaxana Troi episode, I just repeat this over and over again, because I just want to keep saying it until everyone else believes it, because I keep hearing people say the factually incorrect, just flat out wrong opinion that her DS9 appearances are better. Flat out no, just objectively no, just no. All of them suck. They're definitely way worse. Like, in all 3 of them, with the exception of Manhunt, which is her worst appearance, other than that episode, all 3 of them are her worst appearances. All of her TNG appearances, except for Manhunt, are better than all of her DS9 appearances. But anyway, sorry. So this is... And I gotta be honest, again, I have another opinion that might be different than others. I think that season 1 appearance, what's it called? When she's stuck in the elevator, the Forsaken. I think that episode's actually worse than this one. Most people would be like, that one's fine. It's got the cool moment, a nice moment where she's melting in a lap. I'm like, no. That episode's actually worse because... Well, for one thing, the C-plot with Bashir and Ambassadors is one of the worst pieces of shit I've ever seen in the entire franchise. It makes me want to put it on the fucking worst list of the entire franchise. But for another thing, the Lwaxana storyline's worse because she's following him around, sexually harassing him even worse than she is in this episode. And this is the thing. Again, this is something I cover every time I get to a Lwaxana episode, is that the episodes in which she is going around harassing men, being like, I love you love me, and being like sexually harassing, Those are all terrible. That's what I hate. She wasn't doing that in Haven, which is why I don't mind Haven. Dark Page, she was, hey, look at this. She's actually doing her fucking job as an ambassador. Oh, wow. What a concept. And so that's why that's a good episode. And Half a Life, she actually, for once, again, an amazing concept. What a concept. Actually flirts with someone who is reciprocating her feelings. Oh, look at that! Imagine how that works. So any Lwaxana episode where she's not just sitting around flirting with men who very obviously don't want reciprocate her feelings for her is better. Except for maybe the Muse, because I think, well, I don't know. The Muse is a little different because Odo is kind of reciprocative, but she says not really. But the Muse is still terrible because it's the fucking Muse, hashtag fuck the Muse. And it's like it's silly sitcom. But other than the Muse, yeah, any episode of Lwaxana Troi that has her fawning off of men, which is what she's doing in this episode. She's following Odo around everywhere. Following. And now here's the thing, though. And this is another reason why I think The Forsaken's worse than this episode. Is because she's not in it as much. And that's a positive. Less Lwaxana Troi equals good. She's basically, and she doesn't do much other than, have Xanthi fever, which causes everyone else. But the focus of the actual story and the moments of the episode is more on our crew going crazy, falling in love over each other. And she just pops up occasionally to follow Odo around and be like, and be, stupid. But the A-plot is still terrible because of that. Because of her, and because she's just fawning off of Odo. So that sucks. But the main storyline with everyone falling crazy in love with each other is it's like a cartoon. It was a Pepe, like everyone turns into Pepe Le Pew. And that's just so incredibly not funny. I just watched Generations, so I want to say, Data, that was not funny. It's my reaction to this episode. Well, okay, let me be honest. I gotta do some honest admission here. There are a couple moments in this episode that made me chuckle. But let's be clear. Just because something makes me chuckle doesn't mean it doesn't suck. Like, something can still suck, and I can be thinking the time, oh, this is so terrible, this is so horrible, this plot is so dumb, and then a moment will pop up. They'll be like, it just gets an instinctual, but that's it. Like, I'm trying to think what were the moments that made me laugh. I think it's definitely when Vedic Baral punches Cisco. And he's like harassing Cisco to get to Dax, and Dax is hiding behind Cisco, and he's like, I don't think she wants to talk to you. And you see this like finger come up out of nowhere. It's like Dax who's behind Cisco, like puts her finger up. You tell him, Benjamin. Like, that gets a little chuckle from me. And I think there might have been one or two other moments. But I wouldn't necessarily... Like, that was kind of alright. I will admit, begrudgingly, that was a funny moment. But, for the most part, I would be Jordy saying, not funny! But those little chuckles don't make up for how terrible this plot. Like, the whole idea, it's so silly. It is so ridiculous. And watching this episode is a little bit of torture. Even though the few moments make me laugh. Like, seeing the moments of Jake being like, oh, will you go out with me? Or, like, Kara trying to make out with Bra and him being like, oh, I don't want to. Oh, where's Jadzia? And then him, like, harassing Jadzia who's hiding behind Cisco. Like, this is actively annoying. Like, it's, I was just at a live stream with my sister, and we were talking about the worst episodes of TNG. And how some people are like, oh, they're funny. But the correct term to use is actively unfunny. Like, it not only is it not funny, but it's also like the opposite of funny. It's annoying. It's grating on the nerves rather than eliciting humor. It elicits pain. Like, I don't know how to describe it. And most of this episode, especially the main story, was that. It was painful. And that kind of overrides how pretty, the cinematography was, because as I said, that's what's important. It doesn't matter how great the cinematography is. And sometimes, if the story is good enough, it doesn't matter how bad the cinematography is. Sometimes, like, there's some B movies or not B movies, low budget movies with not so good cinematography. Like, I think Kevin Smith's earlier film, like, the cinematography is not good. Like, I could do a better job as an editor, not as I don't know how to work a camera, but but the story is so good, and it is actually funny, that overrides the sort of, who cares? Like, I will grant it, if you have great cinematography and great storytelling, and the cinematography specifically enhances the story, that's what cinematography should do, in my opinion. It shouldn't just look cool for the sake of looking cool. It should enhance the emotional emphasis or the message that they're trying to get, but the moment should enhance whatever this scene is trying to say. That's what good cinematography should do. It shouldn't exist on its own. That's why I often say that the best cinematography is the one that you don't notice. If you notice it, like I was noticing it in this episode a lot. Not all the time. Sometimes you can notice good cinematography. But most of the time, if you notice it, that means it's doing a bad job. Because you should be engulfed in the story. That should be the goal. Whereas in this episode, I was trying to think of anything but the story. So that's the A plot. Now getting into the B plot with the O'Briens. As I was saying, I think this is very realistic. It reminds me almost too much of because my marriage didn't end well, so it's not something I like to think about too much, but it reminds me a bit too much of exactly what it's like. And here's the thing, like almost every scene was totally relatable, because you had the scene when Keiko first comes on board and Miles is like really desperate to see her. He's like, oh, I missed her so much, and he shows up and he wants to, he sees Kieran Brow make out, and it's like, oh, that's what he wants to do. It's like, oh, it's so great to see. And she's just like, oh, fuck, I'm tired, I don't even want to think about it. And then Molly throws up on it. So yeah, and I've had moments like this is so relatable. I have moments like that where me and my wife had when we were together, when we were apart, and we hadn't seen each other for a week, and we reunite, and all I want to do is embrace her, but she's just like had a terrible mood and just had a bad day, and this is not what she's into, and just how disappointing that is. But the other thing I was going to talk about with this scene is they're talking about the trip from Bajor, the shuttle ride from Bajor, and Lwaxana is like, was annoying them on the ride over apparently, and I've even heard some people that reviewed this episode say, oh yes, I know what it's like after a long, flight to be annoyed and just want to rest. It's been established in the show before, that this travel distance between Deep Space Nine and Bajor is roughly 2 hours. I mean, I suppose if you're going in a slower ship, maybe it could be 3, but I don't know. I think they're all going impulse because I think they're within a system. I'm not sure if they would go warp. But yeah, 2 hours, or maybe they would go warp, I don't know, but basically 2 hours. That's not a long flight. I can do 2 hours in my sleep. Fuck. You ever used to fly? I've done the flight between East Coast of America and New Zealand so many times That in total is like close to 24 hours. 2 hour flight seems like a luxury. And plus, you assume this in these spaceships, it's not like a fucking airplane where they cram you in like sardines. I'm sure they have much more room. In fact, it might even, well, I would think some ships would even have their own rooms, but maybe on a 2 hour flight that would be, they wouldn't, maybe they would have a communal area, but I'm sure even then there's no need for it to be so compact and like crammed in the way a, airplane flight would be. So I feel like that was the analogy they're going for. And I'm thinking like Keiko could be tired, but it would be from like doing work that day, not from traveling. Unless the expedition they're on is so deep in the Bajoran Mountains and the Bajorans maybe their internal transport. Like, I'm still unclear whether or not Bajorans have transporters. So maybe she would have to take land transport from where she was in the mountains to the port, and maybe that's all the traveling she was doing. I suppose that could be the case. But even if that was the case, then Lwaxana wouldn't be there for most of that. And the other question I have, what was Lwaxana doing on Bajor? It's the other question I have. But anyway, or maybe the ship stopped by Bajor on the way. I don't know. But it was a layover. She had a layover on Bajor. But no, it's only a 2 hour flight. Okay, sorry. I'll move off that. But anyways, so then the other scene where, the scene where they're talking about going to the festival and Keiko's like, oh, all I want to do is sleep, and then O'Brien's disappointed and she can tell, and eventually she's like, oh, I don't want to make, like, that was a good scene too, that again, very relatable. But the scene I really liked was the one they were sitting in Quarks, and she told him about how it would have to be another 4 months, and she was like, what do you want me to do, resign? And he's like, well, yeah, maybe that's something worth considering. And I can see his point of view, but the way he's saying it seems very sort of antagonistic. And then they start sniping at each other, and then Keiko, this is so relatable, it's unbelievable. When Keiko says, oh, what's his name? Snile or something? I can't remember what the name was. Or some name, random guy's name. It was like, oh yeah, he warned me not to tell you until after the festival. Like, boom. That, like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, no. That is such a classic mistake. Like, that is not something you say to your significant other when you're in the middle of a heated argument. You go, oh, this other guy I was hanging out with warned me not to say this. And I'm not saying this for like specific to their genders. It doesn't matter which gender role you have. You can mix them all up and do whatever. You have like a male say, oh yes, this random girl I was talking to warned me not to tell you. That's just a no. That's a flat out no. You don't do that. But it's so relatable. And then of course Miles loses his temper and he says some really nasty shit that he shouldn't have said, which I'm not excusing him in the least. And I'm not blaming Keiko for doing that. Like, just because she made a huge mistake doesn't excuse the fact that Miles goes and make a bigger mistake. But if I'm being honest with myself, and I was feeling a little bit self-conscious and guilty while I was watching this episode, because if I'm being honest with myself, and I'm sure a lot of people can feel the same way, is that I made a couple of mistakes like that too. I said some dumb shit because I lost my temper in the heat of the moment that I really regret saying. And again, it's nothing like too terrible, because Miles doesn't say anything too terrible here either, but he is being a dick. He's being unreasonable. And I'm thinking, because I was thinking to myself, God, Miles is being such a dick. And then I thought some more. I was like, yeah, I've done this before too. when I lost my temper in the middle of a fight. So there was, it's just I would say it's mistakes all around, but it's more of an issue of miscommunication, which again, communication is key to any good relationship, and that is 100% the case. So, yeah, I think these scenes are so relatable, so relatable. And then when Miles goes to the door and says, "I put in my resignation," this is a lovely scene. It's a lovely storyline, and again, it was realistic that Keiko didn't respond immediately, didn't immediately open the door and go, "Oh, Miles," and hug him. No, I feel like a lot of Hollywood shows and movies would do that, have the other person go, "Oh, really? You're gonna resign your commission for me? Oh, come here." That's not realistic. They want the realistic way of her being like, "Yeah, I heard you, but I need to think about this. We'll talk about it later." That was so amazing. And then I've been in Miles' position as well, where the person says, "Oh, we'll talk about it later," and it's just the worst feeling. You're paranoid, you're terrified that you just fucked up and everything's over and it's going to end. And it's such a haunting feeling. In fact, if anything, I think Miles was underselling it. Just how daunting that is to hear this "we'll talk about it later" thing. But then when Keiko shows up and says, "You better take that resignation back." And that was a really, and again, it was good introspective from Miles, that he realized, again, realistic, something else I can relate to, realizing you said something dumb in the heat of the moment, but then taking it back and doing whatever is necessary to mend things. And him willing to resign his commission, let's be clear, this wasn't a bluff, he absolutely meant it. 100% he meant it. He would. If Keiko said, yes, please come with me, he would have. But I think she was smart enough not to, because she knew, Miles is, smart enough, he was caring enough to let me go, even though he didn't want to, because he knew he respected my career, so I need to respect his career in return. It's a beautiful relationship. Anyone who says, I think one of my patrons will say this later, so I don't want to throw shade or anything. But I think anyone who says that Miles and Keiko's relationship doesn't work, I think they're just wrong. They're just flat out wrong. And I think anyone I hear who's been married can totally relate to this. And this is something they said in the writers' room, apparently. All the writers who had been married, they all thought this is one of the best, most realistic storylines they ever wrote involving a marriage. And I 100% think that's the case. And it was a lovely moment too when she shows up and wears the red dress he was talking about. So I think this might be the best Keiko and Miles storyline out there. And plus, I heard some people complain it's an unrealistic relationship because all they ever do is bitch and complain. Not true. There are episodes Rivals, where Keiko, and I talked about it in that episode, again, terrible episode, but I like the Keiko and Miles scenes because she was 100% supportive. She was so supportive. There was no arguing there. You could see their relationship shine through, so I think whoever says that is just flat out wrong. And plus, at the end, it's not like all they ever do is argue. No, it was a realistic miscommunication, and they made up at the end in a realistic way. It's just such a realistic, powerful relationship. Even Armin Sherman, who hated this episode, which I talked about, even he admit that this was a really realistic storyline, and he liked it. He said much the same thing I'm going to say, is that the one good thing about this terrible episode was the O'Brien storyline. So, Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I want to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neal Howells, Jordan Johnson, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Migalicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Fascination, more like Assination. Oh, good, it's Lwaxana Troi. Yay! Oh, and some weird bickering between Keiko and Miles. That's exactly why I watch sci-fi. To see a married couple squabble, an old woman acting all weirdly horny. Are we almost to Vic Fontaine? I can't wait to hear the Borg Queen say Fontaine way, or meet Garrick's long-lost father, Nabran Fontaine, or the next Trill host after Esri, Vic Dax. Vic Fontaine is worse in this episode. Just saying. Anyway, next, I'd much rather see a married couple squabble and an old woman acting all weirdly horny than Vic Fontaine. Give me that. Anyway, sorry. Next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I know this episode gets a lot of hate, but I don't mind it terribly. I kind of enjoy it, actually. I think it's the best Lwaxana on DS9 episode, but that's not saying much. It's definitely silly, but I enjoy the silliness. Miles and Keiko are a good couple, I think, and their tension here is relatable. I also agree that it is probably the best Lwaxana Troi episode on DS9, but that's relative to say that. That's saying best isn't the right word, because being the best out of three things that are terrible is still terrible. It's like least terrible out of the three. I think that's a better way to put it. That's how I would put it. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius. He says, what a terrible episode. It seems like they wanted to catch up on several relationships and wanted to bring Lwaxana Troi back and then cramped it all into a single episode. Did an author have any idea how long to bring Lwaxana Troi back with a better story? Any other idea would have been better than this. The scenes with Keiko and O'Brien were the only positive thing about the episode, and a good change from all the other relationships in Star Trek, which are only shown in the early stages of infatuation. Finally, I know why Chakotay and Seven started a relationship. The same telepathic effect must have hit Voyager, because there's no other explanation for it. The whole episode feels outdated. They could have at least shown a homosexual love interest, maybe between Garrick and Bashir. Sadly, that was too progressive for the 90s, and it is not funny at all. My rating is a 2 out of 10. Now, as I was watching the Delta Flyers podcast, I believe it was Armin Sherman and Robert Duncan McNeil said that felt like the Bareil and Kira relationship was the worst relationship in the entire Star Trek franchise, that they had zero chemistry. And I was like, okay, I see where you're coming from. I don't like the Kira and Bareil relationship either. But let's not get crazy here. Chakotay and 709 is easily way, 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 way worse. Like, nothing tops that. That is, like, easily the worst relationship on Star Trek, and it's not even close. But, as far as Bareil goes, I think he's a better character when they have him for serious episodes. Whenever they do these romance episodes with Kira, mainly just this episode in Shadowplay, he's terrible. Like, it just doesn't work. And yeah, I agree. I don't buy the chemistry. I don't buy them as a couple. Like, and it's like the whole First part of the season, Kira was like flirting with Odo. I still think she was, and then last episode she probably got it on with Thomas Riker, or at least was flirting with him heavily and kissed him, while she was supposed to be in a relationship with Brown. It's subconsciously being like, yeah, it doesn't work. And I like what they said in the podcast, that the line Jake has when Cisco's trying to get him to stop following Kira around. It's like, yeah, she's already in a relationship with Vedic Baral, and he says, oh, it won't last. So the people in the podcast are saying that was basically the writers saying, no, this won't last. We're getting rid of this soon. It's no good. And they don't even know what's coming up in a couple episodes. And they're just hoping that the writers will get rid of this relationship, but they are smart enough to do so. All right, let's get to the next comment, which is from Norman Buchwald, who wants me to sing. So Norman Buchwald put in notes, to the melody of Human League's Keep Feeling Fascination. Now, I will admit, I have never heard of this song, ever. Never heard of this song. Human League sounds vaguely familiar, and I looked it up, and apparently they're the people who do I'm only human, born to make mistakes. And I actually sang this song before in one of my reviews for Suddenly Human. It was Suddenly Human. And they also did this song, Don't You Want Me? You say you don't want me. Don't you want me, baby? Those are the only two songs I've heard of. I have never, ever, ever, ever heard of this Keep Feeling Fascination song. But I really wanted to sing it. I'm trying to up my karaoke game. So I looked it up, listened to it several times. It's a really hard one to get the tune, so I'm going to try my best. So don't at me if I don't do it just right. So anyway. If it seems Lwaxana's harassing Odo on Gratitude Day, it turns into Xanthi fever, and the lamest comedy beats are laid. Jake's looking for a new Bajoran, and now it's Kira Nerys. While Kira's longing for the doctor to study or to play. And so the evening turned until Vedic Baral pinned Dax, and many fantasies were learned. On that day, keep watching Fascination, bad episode, love so wrong. Keep watching Fascination. The O'Briens turn out not to be moving on. Seriously, this episode was not needed. I do like the idea of an episode surrounding Bajor's Gratitude Festival, but A Midsummer Night's Dream happening to ever so sexual harassing Lwaxana's Xanthi fever. The only good thing to come out of this is a much superior Lower Decks episode in pathological fallacies, even if Xanthi fever turned out to be a misdirection of the Volky-Bindai syndrome. The salvageable scenes are actually the O'Briens trying to figure out their now long-distance marriage. But otherwise, seeing characters wanting to make out with each other was just distracting, unfunny, and made me want to see Shakespeare's classic than this very clumsy homage. 3 sudden spills of Xanthi dizziness out of 10. Spells. Is it spells? Yeah, sudden spells of Xanthi dizziness. Ooh. Excuse me. I like the song. I feel like I might have heard that tune like vaguely before, maybe in a movie or something, but I don't like. does make me, brings me back to my childhood hearing that, because it's so 80s-ish. But anyway, I do like your lyrics, your play on it, but yeah, never heard of that song. Yes, and pathological fallacies was a great episode. I agree. That's the only good thing to come out of this episode. God, that is such a much better episode. It makes me really want to go watch that. And in fact, even though it turned out to be Vulcan-Bendai syndrome, is similar in regards to, the crew acting all silly, and I think that was like a billion times better. I just remember the human pyramid. I think it was Captain Freeman was like on the bridge, and she was about to be overrun by the Bajoran ambassador, or not Bajoran, the Betazoid ambassadors, and she was like, "Don't worry, my crew will stop you." And they cut to like the crew joining together and doing a human pyramid while they're all in their underwear and go, "Yeah!" God, what a better episode. God, I'd rather watch that episode. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy. He says, so my rating is 3. The only part of this episode I liked was the O'Brien storyline, which includes Quark hitting on Keiko, out of 10. My top 25 episodes of the Star Trek franchise, and 5 honorable mentions. 30, tacking into the win. Julian, it's time to face facts. You're not going to pull a rabbit out of your med kit. 29, the magnificent Ferengi. A child, a moron, a failure, and a psychopath. Quite a little team you've put together. 28, the drumhead. My favorite Picard speech. 27, regeneration. One of the best Borg episodes. 26, the offspring. Commander, what are your intentions towards my daughter? Number 25, worst case scenario. This is what Voyager should have been. 24, Chain of Command Part 2. Picard and Gul Madrid disagreed with the lighting systems. 23, the defector. I did it for nothing. My home, my family, for nothing. 22, the council. 21, Timeless. And how did you get involved with Bonnie and Clyde here? 20, Distant Origin. 19, Balance of Terror. I prefer the Strange New World episode a little more. 18, Waking Moments. As I don't dream, it seems like my life is one massive nightmare. 17, Thine Own Self. 16, The Changing Face of Evil. 4, Cardassia! I don't think they said that in this episode. I think they actually said that in What You Leave Behind, but I get you anyway. 15, In the Pale Moonlight. 14, To the Death. 13, What You Leave Behind. I really wish there was Deep Space Nine movies. If Michael Piller wasn't sacked, this may have happened. 12, Improbable Calls. You blew up your own shop, Garrick? Well, I don't think I've ever seen that particular expression on your face. Is it surprise? 11, Dark Page. 10, All Good Things. 9, Damage. Damar faked his own death and traveled back in time. 8, Azadi Prime. The Enterprise is not damaged in this episode. Sorry, I was thinking about Voyager. 7, Scorpion. How sex can go wrong for Harry Kim. Next time, use a plastic body bag. 6, Yesterday's Enterprise. Sela was a better character in Star Trek Online. 5, The Visitor. 4, Living Witness. Mirror version of the Voyager crew. 3, Sacrifice of Angels. Time to start packing. 2, The Inner Light. I wonder, will I agree with someone else's number 2? Number 1, Duet. What you call genocide, I call a day's work. I love and hate this line. Well, you just randomly decided to give your top 25 of the franchise. So I don't know why you chose this episode to do it. I don't know. Maybe it was random. Maybe because you had nothing to say about this episode. But In the Pale Moonlight, number 15. Come on. You can do better than that. That's all I gotta say. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, Distant Origin is also not that great. But other than that, it looks pretty good. I love how you have Dino himself even higher than I do. I do think that's an underrated episode. Anyway, no comment on your number 2, though. So next comment is from Ricky, who says, I don't like this episode. This episode is everything that I don't like. I'm sick with the love potion and everyone acting horny to each other. Although I will say that I did like the O'Brien and Keiko moments in the episode, and I must admit that when Vedic Baral punched Cisco, and Cisco's reaction was golden, where he said, Baral, come on, listen to me. Yeah, that was funny. And then he still tried to punch Cisco, and then Dax beats his ass to the ground. Was hilarious. So overall, not the worst episode in the show, but not a good one either. So my rating is a 3 out of 10. Alright, so final comment comes from Brandon Neal Howes, who says, boredom would be more apt title for this piece of shit in which Star Trek's very own Pepe Le Pew, Lwaxana Troi, arrives on Deep Space Nine supposedly as a Betazoid ambassador who is meant to be present at the Bajoran Gratitude Festival, but ends up unwittingly spraying a disease which makes everyone except Odo, Cisco, and the O'Briens start acting like horny teenagers. But there's no tongue kissing and no moves towards actual sex, which just makes it tiresome. And how many times must we revisit this plot? All the O'Briens seem to do is fight. Come on, Julian, suggest building the Alamo or refighting the Battle of Britain so I don't have to watch this shit again. I'd rather watch the video clip of Fascination by the Human League, and gives a URL to the clip, so I don't know. I already sang it for you, Brandon. On repeat for an hour, then watch this crap again. Two shapeshifters eating messingly out of 10. I think you're referencing the wrong episode. Because if you're referencing when Odo says, oh, I tried eating once, but it was messy, it didn't quite work, it was uncomfortable, and it was messy. He didn't say it in this episode. I think that was Meridian. He actually said that, and because Odo and Kira were talking before, Jeffrey Combs stepped up. So, just saying, get your references right. No, maybe you're not even referencing that. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, this is why Lwaxana Troi shouldn't be on Deep Space Nine. This is why her Deep Space Nine appearances are way worse, because she has no business being on Deep Space Nine. But as far as the kissing with no moves towards sex, I think there's a reason for that. Because none of it's mutual, except for when you get to Kira and Bashir. The rest of it is someone crushing on someone else who doesn't return the feelings. So of course there's going to be no moves towards sex. If there was, that would be called rape, and glad they didn't do that. But as far as the only mutual makeout section, which was Bashir and Kira, there definitely was a move towards sex. Because if you notice at the end of the episode, Bashir is like talking to Cisco in the infirmary about how he cleared the Xanthi fever and everything should return to normal in a day or two. And then he goes to leave, and Cisco's like, hey, where are you headed to? It's like, oh, I'd promised Kira I'd meet her in her quarters. And Cisco said, I think you should delay that meeting for another day or two. And what do you think he was planning on doing in those quarters? Were they going to play Domjot? Were they going to watch a holosuite program? No, they were going to have sex. So they were definitely implying the move towards sex there. And here's the other thing. Like, just Cisco, if that drive to fall in love was so strong, just Cisco saying, oh, I think I'd postpone that for a day or two, wouldn't Bashir just ignore that? If that drive was so strong, wouldn't he go out in the hallway, go towards his quarters, and be like, fuck this shit, and go towards the kid? Like, I think Cisco should have done more than just that slight suggestion. So, yeah. And here's another thing I forgot to mention in my bulk of my review, is that this is probably where Nana Visitor and Alexander Siddig first started hooking up. A lot of people are suggesting that. I think on the Delta Flyers they said, Armin Shimmerman said, no, that this was too early. They didn't get hook up for another couple years. That's not true. Nana Visitor got pregnant during the filming of season 4, which is the next season. So it's 1 year. So it would actually make sense if this is when they first started hooking up. And I watched another review. They said, this is too late. They've already been together for a long time since this episode. Again, that's not true. From what I hear, all accounts from the other actors, no one was aware of them being together until much later. So I think that's it. Nana Visitor and Alexander Siddig has never confirmed this, but that seems to me that they liked making out in this episode, and that's what sort of led them to sort of explore something, in real life. But anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments, except for that singing one. No, thanks for that too. I didn't have to sing, I chose to. I really wanted the challenge. Anyway, my rating for Fascination out of 10 is going to be a 3, very poor. Several other people gave it 3s. I think a 3 fits. It's a terrible episode with terrible, unfunny bullshit of, they're falling in love, and it's just Lwaxana hitting on Odo again, the same thing we saw, and the whole Xanthi fever causing everyone else to... It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make sense. Like, the whole, it's actually a latent attraction. Like, that makes no sense, too. Like, I know how they try to be like, it's best not to think about it. No, bullshit. Jake does not have a crush on Kira. Quark never even fucking met Keiko before. I think Armin Sherman brought that up. So that whole storyline is just bullshit. And I would give it a 1. But the O'Brien storyline is really good. Really good. Definitely, as probably the best O'Brien's storyline, and the relationship was great. Very realistic. Probably one of the most realistic, definitely the most realistic portrayal of marriage on Star Trek. And I actually do like that. I gotta admit, I did chuckle once or twice. Like the whole... Prowl hitting Sisko thing was kind of funny. I would have gladly gone without it, though, if we got rid of that stupid storyline. But, I like the idea of the festival, of the Gratitude Festival. They had an episode. Why not just have an episode where they're hanging out at the Gratitude Festival? You don't need to have them all start flirting with each other and falling madly in love with one another. Just ditch that and just have them hang out. That would have been a decent episode. But anyway, so not terrible because of that, but still bad. So 3 out of 10 from me. So that is it for my review of Fascination. So if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you thought of this episode. Did you hate it as much as I did, or more, or perhaps less? Perhaps you're one of those weirdos that actually really like this episode. Not weird, I'm just kidding. But anyway, if you really want to support my channel, you can do so by supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in that description below, and also in that description you will find a link to my audio page on Podbean with my podcast. If you want to listen to my videos in audio podcast form, you can do so there. Anyway, so let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon for Patreon-only video, revisiting my review for Past Tense, Parts 1 and 2. Great two-parter. Over on Patreon, we'll revisit my review. And on Monday, staying on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Caretaker, finally starting Voyager with the Voyager pilots. And then on Wednesday, I'll be back here on my main channel for a new review for continuing on my coverage of Voyager, covering the second episode, Parallax. And then on Thursday, I'll going back to DS9 to review the next episode, Life Support. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager, and many other videos as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.